Jai Jagannath. We can understand the crux of Arjun's religiosity by going through the different facets and nuances of his arguments. It is pertinent to mention here how Arjun has deliberately mixed up casteism, misogyny, and superstition with religiosity in support of his decision not to fight the war. It is an extension of my last episode, which would end up today only with the closure of the case study of Arjun. Thereafter, I will have a case study of Duryodhana. Most of the people do not give much importance to the first chapter because Krishna doesn't speak here. But actually, the first chapter sets things in perspective, which makes it easier to be more receptive of the rest of the chapters. We see Arjun was beaming with ego, for which, with impunity, he had gone into difference of opinion, even with Krishna. Ego is a dubious one. Once it starts breeding, once it gets hot, it will care nobody, whosoever he may be, in whatsoever position he is at. Verse 41 runs. Shankaro narakayaiva kulagnanan kulashyascha patanti pitaro luptapindo dakakriyaha. Shankaro, he is referring to this Varna Sankaras or unwanted population. Narakayaiva will make life hellish. For whom? Kulagnanam, he is referring to himself and his co-warriors, that is, those who are responsible for the destruction of the families. Kulashascha, in whose families these Varna Sankaras would manifest. Patanti pitoroesham, forefathers will fall down. Why? Luptapindo dakakriyaha, the performance of religious rite of Saddha and Tarpana, that is, offering of Pindodaka. Pinda means food, Udaka means water, will be lost, as a result of which the forefathers, being hungry and thirsty, will fall down and will also lead a hellish life. In verse 42-43, Arjun says, we will lead hellish life eternally, being responsible for the destruction of the families, which would ultimately lead to the disappearance of the family tradition and the non-performance of religious rites and ceremonies due to the emergence of these Varna Sankaras. Verse 44 runs. Oho bata mahapapam kartum yavasita vayam yadrajya sukalovena hantum swajanam mudyataha. Oho bata, alas, how strange. What strange? Kartum yavasita vayam, we are planning, thinking to commit. Commit what? Mahatpapam, great sin. Why? Yad rajya sukhalovena, out of greed of getting royal happiness. We are going to do what? What we are going to do? Hantum swajana mudyataha. We are planning to kill our own relations in the battlefield. In verse 45, he says, I would prefer to be killed than kill. He goes on to say, if all the Dhartarashtras, that is the sons of Dhritarashtra, come armed with weapons in the battlefield to kill me, while I prefer to be in what position? Anan and not resisting. Asastram, apratikaram. Thereby he is presenting himself to be the greatest apostle of non-violence. In previous verse, that is 44, Arjun says, I do not want to fight and kill my relations, which would earn me sin. It is only Krishna who is instigating me to go for the war. And thereby he is declaring, de facto declaring rather, Krishna as the sinner. This is a disrespectful indictment to the Supreme Personality, whom he has treated as his Guru and also something more than a natural human being. Arjun thus through these slokos is passing a sad commentary on the lightness with which they have played with crises, which ultimately resulted in the assemblage of the Kauravas and the Pandavas in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Dharmakshetra. To sum up, when Arjun had come to the battlefield armed with Gandiv, with a desire to fight by taking Krishna as his charioteer, the embodiment of Dharma, the torch-bearer of truth, why he suddenly took an U-turn? Because body and mind are militating against Dharma. He in his mental disposition is presenting pleasure as the highest goal of life, whereas it should have been liberation of oneself from ego, which always remains in a self-created world of ignorance. In verse 36, Arjun says, sin will overcome us in case we kill our own rations in the battlefield. As per Dharmasastra, he goes on to say in verse 38, if in case the Kauravas, being clouded with greed, are unable to see any sin in killing their own rations, that is the Pandavas, and to be superior, Madhav, Krishna. Duryodhana is a boy, let him take the throne and administer. We need to honorably walk away from the battlefield. But in reality, it is a sin to give Duryodhana a walkover. If a man like Duryodhana, with his ruthless pursuit of self-interest, ascends to the throne, then will dissipate a poisonous atmosphere all over, corrupting the mind of a major chunk of people, which would ultimately result in the deterioration of the society and the rule of adharma or injustice. Thus, Arjuna is having a regressive kind of social attitude, one towards women and the other towards lower caste people. He seems to have drawn an analogy from the prevalent dogmas of that time. We also find some of the practices of that time are still in vogue in our time, and since Gita prescribes solution to all such problems, it has become so relevant in modern days. Arjun might have thought that he has given brilliant arguments. The issue of war is done and dusted, the matter is closed and sealed. And he decided that the war is futile and universally concluded to abstain from the war without questioning, without asking even his guru Krishna. Here we see how ego plays a role. When Arjuna had gone to Krishna to seek his assistance just before the start of the war, he stood at his feet as a mark of respect to the Supreme Personality. But now we see how unabashedly he is flinging at Krishna arguments after arguments without waiting for any reaction from that side. But when one would go and ask Arjun, do you want to usurp the position of Krishna? He would immediately say, I cannot even think of that. But you are exactly doing so, sir. Thus, when we see in terms of body and mind, we see all the arguments are flying one way. But when looked through Krishna, the epitome of consciousness, all such arguments look so unfounded and childish. Adolf Eichmann, the general of Hitler, responsible for slaying 6 million Jews, was very fond of Gita and commented that Gita allows cold-blooded bloodshedding, whereas actually it is not. When Krishna, after all the attempts of Krishna to get the matter solved at all levels, failed, collapsed, he finally instigated Arjun to go for the war. Even at the end, he had gone to Duryodhana that all these Pandavas are Kshatriyas. You give them at least 5 villages so that they can perform the dharma of administering the villages. But to that, what Duryodhana replied? I cannot give a piece of land equivalent to the tip of a pin. That's why Krishna finally decided that this is only end up with the cold-blooded bloodshedding of all the Kauravas who are supporting Duryodhana. All the things that guide you toward the truth is non-violence. Jai Jagannath.